Welcome to the Audacious Living Podcast, hosted by my man, Audley Stevenson, the Odd Man. He'll unpack wisdom and insights from a cross-section of top quality performers in business, media, sports, entertainment, and lifestyle to uncover key elements to help you live your best audacious life ever. So without further ado, here is the Odd Man.
Greetings and salutations. I trust everyone is doing well. Hey, I'm Audley Stevenson, and welcome to the most audacious podcast on the web. This is the Audacious Living Podcast, where it's truly a pleasure to be here as we continue our ongoing goal of helping you live your best audacious life ever. Truly thankful and appreciative that you've taken a moment out of your day and have chosen to spend it here with us. So it's greatly appreciated. Thank you so much for the time. You can connect with us on our social media channels, Twitter and Instagram under the handle The Audacious Pod, and then The Audacious Living Podcast on Facebook. I would encourage you to like, follow, subscribe, share, tell a friend. Let's keep that conversation going and let's stay connected. As well, I also mention our YouTube channel. You can also subscribe to that, and every time new content comes out, you will immediately be alerted. And there you go, you're connected. On this edition of the podcast, we're going to spend some time dissecting the Imposter Complex, and I've got the good fortune and privilege to be joined by the talented and brilliant Tanya Geisler to help break it all down. Now, the Imposter Complex is something that a lot of us, if not most of us, are familiar with. It's a psychological phenomenon which essentially is built on a series of lies that we tell ourselves that reinforce this outrageous, wild belief in our heads that we're inadequate, incompetent, or just a phony who isn't worthy of any kind of success. And the crazy part is that even if we've got a long string of past accomplishments, the imposter complex forces us to look past those things and still tries to convince us of otherwise. Now, maybe on its own, the imposter complex isn't a terrible thing because to a certain degree, it holds us accountable. It forces us to ask questions and really look at ourselves. But it's not until we allow it to hold us back and not take those necessary steps forward to advance ourselves, that's where it's truly, truly problematic. Now, Tanya is a leadership coach. She's a writer, a speaker, and an imposter complex expert, and really, really glad that she's here to lend her expertise as, like I said, we break down the imposter complex. She'll provide 12 specific lies that the imposter complex tells us that with the sole intent of keeping us alone and isolated, taking us out of action and forcing us to doubt our capacity. And as we go through those lies, I want you to pay attention closely to see how many of them you've heard or how many you've told yourself. It truly is a super informative chat. I loved having that conversation with Tanya. So without any further ado, I'm going to stop talking and let you hear from Tanya Geisler. Enjoy.
Listen, I don't want to spend a whole lot of time going into sort of long introductions and all that kind of stuff. As much as we call these interviews, I just want to talk, and I don't even feel comfortable calling them interviews because to me this is just a healthy conversation. So love it. This is what it is. So I want to thank you for being here and taking the time. The imposter syndrome, complex phenomenon. There's a whole bunch of names for it, and I really want to drill it down to what it is, because on this podcast, we spend a lot of time talking about things like being bold and being your true self and being audacious. Well, sometimes there's this thing that gets in the way of us being able to do that and living our best audacious lives, and that's the imposter complex. So maybe we can just start there, and so that we're all kind of on the same playing field. What is it, and help us define and get a better picture of what we're talking about.
So it's that's a great place to start when you say, this podcast, we have conversations about being audacious and living our best lives and being our boldest, right? Well, the moment we say, I want to be more audacious, I want to call myself forth, that little voice that says, who do you think you are? Who do you think you are? If you put yourself out there, they're going to find out that you're not all that. That's what the imposter complex is. So I always start with a history lesson because I'm a big fan of attributing the teachers. Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes were the clinical psychologists who discovered this or named it as the imposter phenomenon back in 1978. They were working with high functioning, high achieving women at Oberlin College. And they saw that these women, no matter how successful they would chalk it up to luck, fluke, timing, or having somehow managed to deceive people into thinking they're smarter or more capable than they actually were, right? So their successes were, luck, fluke, timing, but their failures, they were more than able to identify with, right? It was absolutely all on them. So that's really the kind of the baseline of it. It's this experience of devaluing the successes, but over prioritizing the failures, right? That's like the human condition. But what we know to be true is that if you experience this, it actually means by definition that you have beautiful and strong values of mastery, integrity, and excellence. So I always think that's a really good news thing. Like, you are experiencing it because of those values, and actual imposters don't feel like imposters.
They don't care.
They don't care. They're not sitting around thinking like, who am I to X, Y, or Z, right?
Who am I fooling, or who am I putting the wool over? They're just existing and being themselves.
Being themselves. That's it. So if you are actually in the, I want to make sure that my work is really impeccable. I really want to make sure that I do this in integrity. I want to do this in a really excellent way. That's great. That's beautiful values about you. But the imposter complex is uniquely obsessed with keeping us out of action, doubting our capacity, and then keeping ourselves alone and isolated. That's why I'm so grateful to be able to have this conversation with folks like you who are naming it for other people so that we know you're not alone with this.
Yeah. It's funny, like the imposter concept, the complex rather, the concept of the complex, I guess let's try to get out.
Yeah.
I'll admit it was relatively new to me, and when I first heard it, I was like, really? There's a thing called this? And I went through this aha moment because I can reflect on many instances where I can't do this or you shouldn't, and I actually didn't. So it actually prevented me, because whether I said I wasn't supposed to be here, I wasn't good enough, there were people better than me, and I actually slowed myself up. In fact, so I started this podcast in December, and I remember going through this whole period of, okay, I podcasted before, so it wasn't new to me. The stuff I'm talking about I felt really comfortable with because I felt like I've always talked about my entire life. But I still was saying to myself, yeah, but there's a lot of podcasts out there already. Oh, your voice is just going to get cluttered with everyone else's. Yeah, maybe it doesn't make sense to do that. And I had to kind of go through this self-talk where I'm like, no, my voice does matter. And there is a place for me, and why not? So I think it is a very real thing, and it really afflicts all of us.
Absolutely. And what you're speaking about there, so I look at this like there are these 12 really specific lies that it has us believe, and then there are ways that it keeps us out of action, doubting our capacity, or alone and isolated by certain behavioral traits. And so what you were just saying, when you were thinking about the podcast, lie number 4 is you have nothing useful or original or valid to say, or it's all been said before. That's the 4th lie, right? You have nothing. But here's the thing, like, nobody has ever experienced it the oddly way, right? Nobody is going to have the same frame of reference, the same lived experience, your phrasing, your tonalities. And like I said before we even hit record, your people are listening to you because of the way you show up, right? I think about myself, I'm talking about the imposter complex that was named back in 1978, but there are people who are listening to me because they're my people, and they can hear because of my lived experience, my set of values, the way I express myself. It's a resonance for them. Not everybody's going to listen to me. That's fine. But my people will. And there are enough of my people that I can have enough of an impact. And that for me is what it's all about.
Yeah, no, and that's exactly it, recognizing that you have a place. Yeah. You know when you're going through it, because I think that's the identification of it, because it can happen really simply and easily, and like you said, it's that little tiny voice, but it's a loud voice, but really tiny at the same time.
Yeah, it can be very subtle. So I'm going to share with you the 12 lies, and you can share, in the show notes or whatever, because there are these 12 really specific lies, and once you hear them, then oh, this might not be the truth. It isn't. But also,
lies developed by you develop these, or just through the research that came up?
You know that nobody has ever asked me that? What a great question. That's a great question. And you know what? Damn it, I will claim it. These are lies that I've heard anecdotally over the 17 years that I've been really very focused on this. I did a TEDx talk about the imposter complex back in, I want to say 2012. So I've been in the analysis of this for that long. So these are the 12 lies that I've consistently seen time and time again. And I did vet it. I don't know why this is an important detail, but I did vet it by the clinical psychologist Pauline Clance, because I need the gold star from the teachers.
You got the stamp of approval.
I needed that, yeah, of course. And that's part of the excellence. That's part of the integrity, right? Like you want to build upon the teachings of other folks. But the first lie is the first lie is your self-doubt is proof of your inadequacy. So anytime you are in that little loop of clearly I am inadequate because I feel inadequate, you're in a dissonance loop. No, actually, you are in self-doubt because you're human. And it is actually very incredibly human experience to feel self-doubt. That's just how we are set up for ongoing success. Our job is to make sure it doesn't keep us out of action. So again, remembering that it has this 3 objectives: out of action, doubting your capacity, and alone and isolated. Nothing is a problem until it's a problem, when it's keeping out of action, doubting your capacity, and alone and isolated. Does that make sense? Because I want to make sure, and the reason, let me just back up for one more second here. The reason I call it an imposter complex, not a syndrome, I get in so much trouble with my SEO people, oddly. It's wild, because of course everybody's searching for imposter syndrome, because that's what Sheryl Sandberg called it in Lean In. But when we call it a syndrome, it's not actually a medical diagnosis. So it kind of pathologizes something that is more like an experience or a complex. Anyway, so your self-doubt is proof of your inadequacy is the first lie. Second is successful people don't experience this, right? So people are looking at you and saying, oh, Audley is so confident. He's such a brilliant communicator. Like he's done so many things so audaciously. Clearly he doesn't experience it. That's just one more way we're looking to other ourselves, which is why you bringing it to your people is so important.
Yep. Because it's a real thing. It's a real thing. It affects everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. And we live in the third lie is you are all or nothing. So this is, I would say, one of the biggest ones. So you were asking, like, how do people know when you're inside of it? All or nothing is a huge one, because this means you are either a complete success or a raging failure, right? There's nothing in between. And it lives inside of this complex binary, it's either this or it's that failure, and that is such a great tell, I think, for the imposter complex, because the truth, of course, is that life happens in the in-betweens. So when you hear yourself, if I don't knock this out of the park, then I'm a total failure, then you know that you're in the land of the imposter complex. The thing that you said about, nothing useful to say, or like, why would I start a podcast? There's so many other podcasts. That's pretty classic stuff. Don't tell anyone about this is another one, right? Like, try to keep it, pay you hush money, or tell everyone about this. Tell everybody how you feel like the imposter, like you don't belong. This is the oversharing, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. You're not ready yet is lie number 7. That is a huge one, and this is the one where I think we get tripped up on the most, because the truth of the matter is no one was ever fully ready for anything. And this is your work, oddly, is to help people recognize that they are ready enough. You might not be perfectly ready, because who was ever perfectly ready for anything?
Well, the question is, what is ready? That's really the question. And I bet you people have a hard time defining it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Are you right? Like the first time you were asked to manage a team, the first time you became a parent, like who's ready for anything? Right. Nobody is. Right. There has to be that leap of faith though. There has to be. And I think that that's what your work really is about, is helping people to discern their own level of readiness to take that big, beautiful, bold, audacious action, which nobody's ever going to be fully ready for, but you're ready enough, right? You're never going to be able to pull that off again as line number 8. It's just a matter of time before this all crumbles beneath you is line number 9. You can't trust the praise of others because they're just being nice. Line number 11. This one also gets me into trouble.
That's like a people pleaser one, isn't it?
Oh, yes, indeed it is. You got it. Yes. Yeah. That's a huge one, right? You can trust people with your lives, but not their praise. It's wild. You're going to have to fake it till you make it gets me into a lot of hot water, because I think it's much more enduring to be able to really root into the truth about your capacity, root into the truth of your abilities, build on that, and then take action. And then asking help is for the weak. That's the 12th lie.
Oh, yeah?
Right? Got to be independent. Got to do it yourself. Got to. Like
just the opposite. It's just the opposite. I mean, if you can ask for help, you're showing that you're okay with being vulnerable, that you need help, and that you can't do it on your own. And and again, there's a network of people out there that I'm sure are willing to offer you that support. So it's definitely not a sign of weakness.
Not just willing. I think they're waiting, right? Your people, look how generous you are. If somebody asks you to be able to support them, somebody that you respect and admire, and they ask you for support, it's such a gift to be able to do that, to uplift somebody. So anytime you're hearing any of those internal lies, or you hear that internal narrative, you are likely in the space of the imposter complex. Now, there might be other things that are happening. We all live inside of certain systems and structures that are problematic, individualism that's created, or paternalism or whatever. So those will try to force us to think that we have to do this all on our own. But from the lens of the imposter complex, this is what I've seen time and time and time again, that those are some of the lies. And if we can untangle, then we can go, okay, now I know what's actually going on. I'm on the precipice of doing something that really actually matters to me. And now I need to make some different choices.
And it's so important to be able to recognize those lies as we're telling them to ourselves, because that will tell you exactly where you are in that moment and what's going on. And I kind of think that if those lies are coming up, you're probably headed in the right direction.
Exactly.
You're going in the right direction. People talk about, whether you're going on a stage, perform, or whatever, and you get those butterflies in your stomach. That's what you lean into. That's what you embrace, because that's where you should be going. You're meant to do those things.
That's right. It matters. That's what I say when people are like, oh, I can't do a thing. Just like, you can even acknowledge that as you take the stage, as you're worried about fumbling your words, you can see, I'm excited to be doing this and nervous because it matters. Both should coexist, right? And this is what I say to folks all the time when they say that they don't experience the imposter complex. I challenge, say, are you swinging out? Because if you're not swinging out and you're not coming up against this, then maybe you're not swinging out far enough.
Playing it safe.
Right. And that's fine for some people, but they're probably not the people who are like paying attention to my work. You know what I'm saying? So there's lots of people that don't care about any of this, and that's perfectly fine. But the people that are coming to this work, who are listening in on these conversations, they're doing it because they want to continue to meet their edge. They want to take bold, audacious action.
And those are the people, for example, who I'd love to talk to, because if you're playing it safe, then you're not taking those bold, audacious actions. You're keeping it where you're not taking any risks. And interesting enough, I oftentimes say that if you're really being yourself, that's not taking a risk. That's just being you, right? So how do you be you? How do we get you? Right?
So good, so true. Yes. Yeah.
I want to talk about how the imposter complex and the impact on women, because it seems, from what I understand, far more women, it impacts them far more than men. Is it sort of difference?
So, the truth of the matter is this concept back in 1978, Clance and I were working with a group of women at Oberlin College. So there's a way in which it became pretty gendered from 1978, but we actually know it to be an instrument of evolution. It's actually embedded to make sure we don't mutate too fast. And I think that, was it Valerie Young? I don't want to misquote, Valerie Young wrote The Secret Thoughts of Successful Women. And she has actually since said that she wishes that she had written just Secret Thoughts of Successful People, because she talks a lot about the imposter phenomenon in that book. And then also realized how there's a way in which it does affect everybody. I think it's really important, though, to acknowledge that it does affect us differently. So one of my dear friends, Stacey Jordan Shelton, her mentor, Kendall Wright, talks about how we might be in a shared space, but not having the same shared experience. So I think that's really important to remember with the imposter complex. I have to talk about it flattened, like we're all experiencing it the same way.
Yep.
But I'm a white, able-bodied, neurotypical woman of middle-class means living in North America. That is not going to be everybody else's lived experience as they hear me talk about it. So actually, I have my own podcast called Ready Enough, where I talk to other teachers who can bring in a more of an intersectional lens, who can talk about what it's like to be trans and experience the imposter complex, who can talk about, because I don't have those lived experiences. And I will say that, for every concentric circle that we are othered from whoever lives at the center of the dominant culture, we will have an exacerbated sense of the imposter complex. So by race, by ability, by gender, by neurotypicality, et cetera, et cetera. And there's, of course, a world that lives inside of those et ceteras. So I think that it's important to say that we can experience it, but we're definitely not experiencing it in the same ways. But when we know that we're dealing with the imposter complex and it's trying to keep us out of action, doubting our capacity, and alone and isolated, the strategies will be the same, but the nuance of how it affects us all is going to be very different. And so my podcast is about helping people find the right teacher for them, right? Yeah. So I'm going to be inviting you to be a guest.
Yeah.
You're on alert.
I'm there. and I think when we're talking about the difference of impact, certainly acknowledging those differences, I think, is important as well too, because I could be saying to someone that doesn't have my experience and go, well, I feel this way, and they may not be able to connect with it. Going, what are you talking about? That doesn't exist, and perhaps it doesn't exist in their world, but certainly acknowledging those experiences are important. I think that's there's key in that for sure.
I think so too. I mean, I'll just say for myself, what I find a little frustrating about the self-development space, which is what I live in, is we use the same brushstroke for everybody. And I think we're smarter than that. I think we can do better than that. And I even talk about there are certain behaviors that the imposter complex shows up with: procrastination, perfectionism, people pleasing, leaky boundaries, comparison, and diminishment. And so you asked about gender, and of those 6, there are a couple that are a little more unique to women because of the way we've been socialized. That's not to say, you recognize people pleasing right off the bat. So right? So there might be that might be part of your tendency.
Yep.
And it's how you've been socialized, right? So like,
did I make it too obvious?
That's awesome. And here's the thing. I think that, the value of perfectionism, the diminishment, the people pleasing, I don't think that any of these are inherently problematic. Like everything else, it's not a problem until it gets in the way. Because I actually think I want to live in a world where there are more people pleasers. Let's be honest. I would actually rather live in a world where people uphold, people pleasing for me is about inclusivity. That's a good thing. If you have leaky boundaries, it's because you prioritize generosity. That's a good thing. People who tend to diminish have a very beautiful value of humility. That's a good thing. Like, I want to live in that world where there's excellence and humility and generosity, inclusivity and kindness. Those are all beautiful things, right? That's a good world. So, but the self-development space is like, stop being a people pleaser, stop being a perfectionist, stop diminishing, like shine your light brighter. Okay, right? Like, it is all about context and discernment and nuance.
Yeah.
And some people are people pleasers because it's safety, right? Some people have learned about leaky boundaries to keep themselves absolutely safe and to make sure that they are, so like we just can't use the same brush for everybody's experience.
Yeah. And again, the context, I think you're bang on there. It is so important that we bear in mind that again, we've heard context does matter. I even go back to the piece about integrity. That would have been something that I would have connected to in terms of, well, hey, you've got integrity because you don't want to be a fraudulent person, as an example. And that's something I never had even thought of, but there's tremendous value. And it really, you swing that pendulum and put the emphasis on that changes the framework of the conversation.
1,000%.
Yeah.
1,000%. Yep. And I think it's like, it's in here because again, it's letting you know that it matters, right? You're starting a podcast, you want it to have meaning, you want it to connect with people. That is a good thing, right? As you say, like if you were not swinging out and you're just like being who you are, that's fine. That's perfectly fine. But is it gonna change the dial? Because I don't know if you've noticed this, but we're kind of in a bit of a mess right now. Well, we need this dial to change. We need people swinging out a little bit more, and yeah.
Well, and you hear so oftentimes, I meant to do more. Well, yes, you meant to do more, but you've actually got to do more to be what you need to do, right? Like, I mean, you have to actually take that first step and swing out. Absolutely.
That's right.
We're talking a lot about the complex, what it is. Let's jump into some strategies, if you will, and sort of what sort of things that people can do to address, make it go away, fix, maybe maybe temporary, maybe come back, who knows? But I mean, a few things that we can with our listeners and strategies.
So I always say that I'm not interested. Well, I would be very interested if I could, but I can't, so I won't. I'm not interested in eradicating it, right? Because it actually does have some deep wisdom. Like it's showing up because this matters and because of those values. So for me, it's really about having a faster recovery, which is what the Buddhist monks call it, or flipping on the light switch faster, right? So you can go like, oh, I recognize that lie. The I'm not ready yet lie. Oh, that's good to know what's actually true about it. So if it has three main objectives: to keep you out of action, doubting your capacity, and alone and isolated, the most efficient strategies are going to address each one of those. So if it's trying to keep you out of action, what we have to do, and again, this isn't something that can just happen overnight, but maybe it can, really looking at what is in the way. So I call this meeting the critics. If you think I can't start a podcast, is that because you don't think that you're smart enough? That's probably an inner critic objection. Is it because you don't know anything about starting a podcast? That's probably a realistic objection. Is somebody in your life telling you that you're not good enough to do that? That's a bully. So like actually looking at the nature of the objections, the reason you can't do it, and then playing whack-a-mole with it, right? So
like drilling down, like asking that why?
Yeah, why?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then and also why it matters, right? We have to make the why it matters bigger than all the reasons that you can't. So, the realistic objection of like, I don't know how to run a podcast. Fine. There's a thing called Google, right? We can all figure out how to do most of the things. The actual, like, I'm not smart enough, that's different. That's an inner critic. So maybe you work with a coach on that. Maybe you work with a mentor on that. Maybe you work with somebody else who just have a conversation with somebody else who's done it before and get to the heart of that. Like, how did you overcome the mindset part? So, and mindset's of course a huge part of overcoming the imposter complex, or being able to address it. So that's like really meeting the nature of the objection. That's called meeting the critics. That's the first thing. The second thing is, if it wants to have you doubt your capacity, your job is very simple. You have to remind yourself on a daily level, a daily basis, why you are so capable of all of the things that you have done and what is still available to you. This is, again, other practices of, this is about tracking your wins. This is about taking, really doing an assessment of all of your strengths, of all of that you've accomplished, all that you've survived and healed and delivered and sold. We don't do this enough because we are so busy on to the next thing, right? We barely celebrate any of the things that we make happen because we're on to the next. But because we miss the celebration, we miss the integration of all that we did. The feeling that, damn, I'm supposed to feel the sense of accomplishment. I'm supposed to feel good about it. Like, right. You and I are having a fabulous conversation, but unless we pause and take a quick second to go, hot diggity dog, that was really great. I'm really glad, right? Like, yeah. We'll forget and we'll be on to the next thing because we both have busy days. So really creating some structures for yourself. And I actually think about, I call this bolstering your authority thesis, and really looking at all you have done. People hate it when I ask them to do this. It's so uncomfortable, but like, there is a reason I want you to remember your, grade 7 whatever it was, right? Like when you were class rep, you put your hand up to the class rep or whatever it was, like there was that moment when you thought, oh my God, if I do this thing, the ground is going to open up and swallow me whole.
Yep.
But what you actually discovered is that you jumped and that the party was on the other side of the resistance.
That's right. I love that. We spend so much time on this podcast talking about the greatness that lies on the other side of adversity. And you know, so imagine that boulder in the middle of the road, and whether you go up, over, around, or through, but if you get to the other side, as you said, that's where the party's at, right?
That's where the party's at.
So, yeah.
But we've been at that point so many, like thousands of times. So I don't care what it was, but the moment before that, you were there and you'd made a decision. And that's what we have to remember. We have to remember those moments, not just the party on the other side, but those moments, because we've been here thousands of times before, and it might not look the same, but it's the same. So that, like, reminding ourselves, and that's an internal thing, because if we don't have that, we haven't done that internal work. It doesn't matter how lovely the words are that people say about us, or the sweet tweets, or the reference letters, or the testimonials. It doesn't matter, because we haven't conditioned ourselves for it, right? It's that water off the duck's back. And particularly for those of us who are people pleasers, we're like, oh, they're just being nice, right? They just like us.
Right. That's exactly it. Well, and I've always been a fan of stockpiling wins. It builds momentum. It gives you motivation. It reminds you that when you run into a similar situation, yeah, we've been here before. Let's just beat it again and move ahead. So I mean, personally, that's always been one of sort of, you know, my personal keys to success, if you will, is stockpile wins. Remember the good stuff. Remember the times when, you know, you didn't feel you had the energy, you didn't feel you had the motivation, but you found a way to get through it anyways. Because that's personally, it skyrocketed me.
And this is, I think, what your particular genius is, Audley. I think that helping people with this, because it is so hard for so many people. So people actually need to be guided through the process. Like, honestly, I work with high achieving folks all the time. And this is the part that they're like, yeah. And I'll say, but have you really done it? I had a woman 2-3 weeks ago say, you know that I forgot to put down that I have a PhD? You forgot that you have a PhD? My goodness. So this could be like a particular piece of your huge body of work, is reminding people, because we forget. And, you know, I'm pretty next level at it, and I still forget. It's probably been a week since I've written in my, you know, my own brag book or put anything in. So, you know, and then the third is, if it wants to keep us alone and isolated, our job is to get social, assemble the cast, make sure that you are surrounded by people who will, you know, challenge to a degree, but make sure that you are surrounded by the best. But here's the most important part: ask them to uplift you when you need to be uplifted, because it does want to keep us alone and isolated. So our job is to make sure that we are surrounded, that we get the support that we need, and feel worthy enough to ask for that very same thing. And none of this is easy. And if you're
during COVID, I mean, like, we're isolated, you know, we're mandated to be socially alone right now because of the situation. So that, you're right, it's not easy at all.
It's not easy. It's absolutely not easy. And so, you know, and also, you know, even people say, not one more Zoom conversation. Okay, but then get on the phone and put on your walking shoes and walk around whatever space is available to you. Like, find whatever way it is to connect, because we are social beings, and that's the reason we need to make sure that we are surrounded by the best kind of folks.
You got it. Yeah. Awesome. Tanya, I've loved every aspect of this conversation. One more thing I want to ask you before you go, before we wrap up here. I guess generally, because you all that we're talking about, the piece that underlines all of this is our own personal joy and happiness, and how important that we do all of these things to, you know, self-fulfillment, satisfaction, you can call it all of those things, but ultimately it's our personal joy and happiness. I wonder if you can comment on that.
We could do a whole hour on that. I call that your brand of joy. What I experience as joy, you probably experience something similar, but I think for you, it has a lot to do with connection. You are so clearly a connector. So for me, one of the first things I have my people do is understand what that word is. That is the desired emotion, all that they do, and then what values underpin that. So for me, to feel what I experience as joy, I need to feel gratitude, I need to feel generosity, and I need to feel connection. And so I know that if I don't feel joy in the next speaking gig or in working with this client, or I have to be able to find a way to feel more generous or grateful or connected to it. And that will bring me back to that super highway, because, it's my job to access that. Nobody can give that to me. So I have to reverse engineer how I can access it the best. And it has to be true in everything. I lost my dad a couple of years ago, and I just remember in that grief feeling profound amounts of joy, because I could always find a way to be connected, grateful, and feeling generous inside of that context. So that's my job. So I'd love that you name that, understanding that sort of the pivotal values that are that matter above all else to you will inform how you do all of the things that you do. So the decisions that I make, what I write, how I speak, how I coach, how I parent, all has to be infused with a sense of that joy for me.
Oh, I love it. That's awesome, Tanya. This is so great. I'm so glad that we did this. It's a very important conversation, and I know listeners will sort of walk away with some really good learnings and insights, or even if it was just one nugget that they took from this. I think there's great value in that, because I think what we're talking about here is how we all show up in the world as our best possible selves, and that just has to be the goal. So thank you for your contributions today. It's awesome.
It was so good to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation. I feel like I've got a new friend. I'm really, really excited to watch you soar. I know you're going to just keep that expanding, and it's glorious to see. Thank you so much for having me.
Where can our listeners catch up with you or learn more about your work, Tanya? Let's let them know.
TanyaGeisler.com is my site, and I'm pretty much everywhere else as Tanya Geisler. So you can find me on whatever social place is best for you. That's where I'll be.
Awesome. Again, Tanya, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure, and be well.
Thank you, Audley. Thank you so much.
Back we are here on the podcast, and first off, thank you, Tanya, for being here. You are a generous powerhouse in this space, and I appreciate you. Certainly generous with your knowledge, your insights, your time, but more importantly, your energy. So again, thank you. I've said many times to listeners that I don't enter into these interviews, if you will, with a scripted set of questions. And I certainly have a general sense of where I'd like things to go, but I'm far more interested in allowing the conversation to be free-flowing and see how it evolves. And that's exactly what my chat with Tanya was. Certainly some big takeaways. There's always some takeaways, and of course, the biggest in my mind was really how easily we can slip into that land of the imposter complex, and it can happen very quickly and again very easily. As I said before, it's one thing to go there, but it's an entirely different thing when we set camp and we stay and have no plans of leaving. Again, if you think about it, the imposter complex is uniquely obsessed with keeping us out of actions, doubting our capacity, and making sure that we're alone and isolated. When those things happen and we're not moving forward, it's kind of for this reason why the naming of it is so important. Because when you're naming and you're identifying the complex, those are the first steps to removing it. So it doesn't hold you back. It doesn't cause you to minimize your achievements, or it doesn't prevent you from conquering the mountains that we're all intended to. Hey, listen, if you haven't registered for email notifications of the podcast, you certainly can do so by heading over to audaciouslife.com. You enter in your email address and you'll be immediately alerted every time there's new content that comes out. Again, if you're a big fan of the podcast, certainly Apple is a great place to go to leave a review. Like, follow, subscribe, share, tell a friend. All of it would be appreciated. I appreciate our listeners, and I really mean this, and I always say this, but it's really true, that I really appreciate the ongoing support. So thank you. Hey, we've reached the end of another episode. So until next time, stay safe, be kind, show love to one another, and be audacious.
You've been listening to the Audacious Living Podcast, hosted by Audley Stevenson. If you enjoyed what you heard, be sure to like, subscribe, and share. Until next time, be audacious.